This is Brady Josephson. We are so excited that you are taking an hour out of your day to spend with us to talk about donation page friction. I believe if you signed up, you saw we're talking about 7 types of friction. Brady kind of went on his own and added a new one, so you get a little bonus. You get 8 types of friction today. But we're going to look at some preliminary findings from some new research around donation page friction. But let's jump right into a few things we need to cover before we get into the content, which number one, the most popular question that is ever asked on any of these webinars is, will there be a recording? And the answer is always yes. So later this evening around 5 p.m. Central Time, we will send you some links to the slide deck, to the recording, and to some additional resources that will be mentioned throughout the webinar today. We are going to do our best to make time for Q&A at the end of the webinar today. You see Brady kind of grimacing over here. We're also going to do our best to get through all the key principles and some really cool, interesting findings. So we may be a little more limited in the amount of questions we have, but feel free to put any question, any thought, any idea into the chat. I'll be watching that throughout the webinar. Riley on our team will be watching that throughout the webinar, and we'll try to make some time at the end for questions. One thing I always want to make sure that you know about, because it's super fun, it's super cool, you're going to learn a ton, is the NIO Summit, the Nonprofit Innovation and Optimization Summit. It's a bit of a mouthful, but we're back in person this year at the end of September, September 21st through 23rd. It's 2 full days of content. There's like a pre-summit workshop day as well. You'll hear from 16 plus speakers. We expect to have over 600 fundraisers and marketers in person in Austin to learn new ways based in research, based in data that you can actually grow your fundraising, grow your giving. So you can learn more. You can get tickets at niosummit.com. And right now you can get $500 off of their early bird promotion. So make sure to head to niosummit.com, learn all you can about the summit, and sign up and get your ticket because we'd love to see you there. Again, today we're talking about 8 types of friction. Again, this is Brady. He's our VP and Managing Director of the Next After Institute. And we also have Nick Miller with us today from Fundraise Up. They have made it possible to conduct this research so that you can actually learn all these new things about donation page friction and how you can continue to grow. So we'll hear from Nick later on about kind of why they sponsored this research and some of the cool stuff that they're doing at Fundraise Up as well. But without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Brady, and I'll see you in a little bit for some Q&A time.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Nathan. Thank you, everyone, for coming. And a huge thanks again to Fundraise Up. They partnered with us on this research. And what they and we are trying to solve is really one problem. How do we grow giving and generosity? But more specifically, when it comes to online fundraising, how do we change this? When you look at the main donation page, so the main page that most people interact with on your website to make a donation, it converts at about 21%, according to M&R's latest benchmark report. So thanks, M&R, for their great benchmark report. But that means 79% of people click donate, arrive on your donation page, and do not complete a gift. So the question that we have and you have and we all should have is why? And what can we do about it? So friction is one of the elements in this kind of giving equation. So if we use this, comes from the folks at Mech Labs, to think about why do people make the decisions that they do. You'll see this here is friction. And it's on the cost side of the equation. This is a negative factor when we're thinking about why do people make decisions. Alongside things like trust and anxiety, these are cost factors. And then on the value factor, on the positive side, there's things like incentives, there's things like value proposition, there's things like someone's innate motivation and values beliefs when they reach your page. And if we can communicate more value and decrease the perceived cost, we should get more conversions. That's a general framework that we use to think about donations. But today we're just focusing very much on friction. So a definition you can use is the psychological resistance. So it's often actually in the mind of a donor that your visitors experience when trying to complete an action. Friction is a conversion killer. Friction is one of the things that we spend a lot of time studying at the Next After Institute, both through experimental research. So we have the world's largest experiment fundraising library, where we'll show real experiments like this. There'll be a control and a treatment. And through rapid experimentation, we have over 2,800 experiments now. We've been able to figure out these kind of pain points on a main donation page, these friction points, and understood if we can address those in some way, shape, or form, we can increase the likelihood of response and get more donations, increase generosity, and significantly grow revenue, not based on what you think or what I think, but what donors are actually doing when they come to our page. So again, these are publicly available experiments. You can dig through the library. That's one form of research. The other one is this more forensic research where we observe nonprofit behavior, and then we'll go out and look for these friction factors in their online giving experience. So last year we partnered with Salesforce.org, 630 organizations in 9 countries and 6 languages. And what we found is 95% of organizations globally had at least some form of friction in their online giving experience, proven to hinder or hurt the chances of a donation. So what's so cool about this research that we did with Fundraise Up is we wanted to do a more deeper analysis, tentatively called Get the Friction Out of Here. We'll see if that stays the title, to really look at, okay, what are these core elements and what can we do about it? And so the research design, instead of just kind of observing nonprofit behavior, we actually built a tool alongside Fundraise Up where people could go through and do a self-assessment of their donation page. And what they did is they could actually complete 36 different questions related to the online giving experience and then benchmark themselves to the other 600 and some organizations that have filled out this tool. Now, 25 of those questions, we actually gave positive or negative points based off what our research suggests is a good thing or a bad thing for conversions to actually get you kind of a letter grade or points out of 25. So in the end, we looked at 643 organizations and more than 1,000 organizations have now taken this. So we had a cutoff point of April 1. So of those 643 organizations, they were split across these kind of 17 different verticals. By far the biggest vertical was human services. There was this other category when people didn't like to be categorized in normal verticals. And then Christian ministry was about 13.5%. I should note here that these 3 verticals, veterans, political, and public broadcasting, less than 10, we just kind of disregard. We'd make no analysis, no insights. And keep that in mind, even for the other ones, when we kind of compare and contrast verticals, we're dealing with unequal data sets, and even some like food banks and churches, it's still a relatively small sample size. So just keep that in mind, that we're not talking about thousands of organizations. We're talking about dozens or possibly even hundreds, but it's still not fully indicative of the space. But when we looked at the average score, we found that actually higher ed were the worst performing, on average about 14 out of 25. And then disaster and international relief was the best. Now, we actually did a research study on higher ed organizations last year, and this is not a surprising result. If you work in higher ed or if you've given to your alma mater, you know that this is a very friction-filled giving experience in higher ed. And so when we kind of charted out over the scatter plot, and I have to say huge thanks to Beatrice Jimenez, who's our new fundraising research associate, who put this together in her very first week with very little oversight and instruction from me. But we can see here the average score, both median and average, is 17, and the average grade was about 68%. So you can see it kind of looks a little bit like a bell curve, but it's just shifted a little bit maybe to the right. And if you want to know like who are some of the organizations that did really well, here's some of the higher performing organizations. And again, this is self-assessment, so we didn't validate or verify whether they were good or bad. This is what they told us as they went through and made a $20 donation. But Animal Care Trust, Feeding America, National Audubon Society, who's performed highly in other studies, PETA Foundation, Terra Peninsular, who's actually a Fundraise Up client, Texas Public Policy Foundation, who's a Next After client, and United Arts Council of Greensboro, who's a Fundraise Up client. We will share some of those examples to show what some of these concepts look like. So the question is, well, why? Why do they perform good or why do they perform bad? And this is where the 8 different types of donation page friction come into play. So we're going to go through all these 8 with some examples of why it's important and what we saw in the study. So the first is field number friction. So here's why it matters. It's basically the more form fields that you require in particular, but even that you just display, the greater the chance someone just actually abandons the process. It sounds like or feels like there's too much information. So in the research experiment library, we've seen by just adding one required field, especially a personal piece of information like a cell phone, can decrease donations or the likelihood of conversion 42.6%. Now that's a pretty extreme example. I know Fundraise Up did their own analysis and found that requiring phone overall decreased conversion about 2%. So a lot less extreme, but requiring information, especially personal information, will decrease your conversion rate. So when we looked at, did organizations require non-essential information other than the basic things that you needed to process a gift, 83% of them said no. Now, I'm a little suspicious because we've looked at this in numerous studies, and we normally find that it's about 30 to 40% of organizations require extra information. This is about 17. So maybe they're kind of fudging it a bit. Maybe they think information is not required that actually is, and vice versa. But we did see that higher ed here is one of the most significant verticals in terms of requiring additional information. And there's two forms that are of where that stood out for higher ed. And the first is phone. We actually looked specifically, do you require a phone number? And now 29% of the organizations do require phone and 71% do not. But you can see higher ed and church are some of the verticals that actually require. So again, what we've seen in our research, at least making phone optional, we've seen no difference in conversion rate. So whether it's a phone field or it's something like here where they're actually requiring your phone number, or here kind of optional form fields, but there's extra fields so it looks like it's more work, more things for you to do, like your name, is this in honor of someone, or there's special instructions, who's your employer. The more information you try to collect, the likelihood that someone abandons the giving process goes up. So compare that to something like this, where they do have phone, but it's optional. This would be more of what we would say is a frictionless or friction-reduced giving experience. So for field number friction, it's fairly simple. Do you have to get it to process a gift? If not, remove it, and only ask for information that's actually needed to complete the transaction. Now, there's some caveats and edge cases, and we can talk about those in the questions, but as the general rule, this should be your starting point. Only require and mandate information you need to process a gift. Now, field number friction works in conjunction with this thing, field layout friction. So field layout friction is basically how form fields are laid out. Basically, do they use horizontal space or look shorter, or are they really, really long? Because how they're laid out actually has an impact on someone's likelihood to start and someone's likelihood to complete. And here's what I mean. This is an experiment where the form information is the exact same. The amount of information is the same. No difference above the form. The only difference is the layout. You can see on the left here, they did not use horizontal space. So this form looks pretty long. Where on the right, they did use this horizontal space and they grouped fields together like city, state, and zip. So it actually just looked shorter. The information being collected is the exact same, and yet they increased conversion almost 40% by just laying out the form differently. Perception is reality. If it looks like it's less work, we're more likely to start and then more likely to complete. So in the study, we asked, are your form fields grouped together? And only 60% said yes. So often this isn't something that you can change or can change easily within your tool. So hopefully this is something your donation tool provider already has. You might be able to get a little bit more advanced and maybe use something like Google Optimize and personalization and reformat some form fields. But this is an example of a good product should know this and should have this built right into the product. So you don't have to worry about laying out form fields grouped together in horizontal space. Arts and culture, who we've studied before, and often is the organizations are a little smaller and a little less sophisticated. So this potentially indicates that they're using tools that aren't quite as sophisticated. Therefore, they're not laying out form fields horizontally. And so again, a couple examples that we saw in the study. Here's, don't really do this. Look at all that kind of wasted dead space over there on the right. So this page looks very, very long. But do something more like this. This is a widget style giving experience, but you can see how they're using horizontal space so it looks short. Or this is kind of a one-page flow form, and you can see how, again, they're using horizontal space to limit how much work it looks like. So it's a pretty simple concept, grouping form fields together and using that horizontal space so it looks like less work. People are more likely to start, more likely to complete. Hopefully that's something your tool has and does. Form error friction. This is, again, a tool-based thing. This is very difficult to change, but this is what it looks like, is when you're completing your information and you miss a field that's required or you misspell an email or something like that, it should tell you right away that you've made a mistake, as opposed to you getting to the end, you click next or you click donate, it refreshes the page, and then you see this dreaded, red mark, the mistake that you missed, an error that you made, and then you have to do it all over again. So what we were asking here is, does your form highlight missing fields? And this was a bit surprising to me because we make hundreds of donations every year, but 89% of organizations said, yes, we let you know that this field is required while you're filling it out. One of the worst in this case was churches that filled out our donation friction assessment tool performed a little bit less than the average. So again, this is what it kind of looks like. If you don't have the kind of inline show you that you're making an error, here's one simple solution, is they just have this asterisk. And what this means is this is required, right? What you don't want to have is a lack of clarity in terms of what information is required or not. So even if you don't have the cool form error notification, at least being able to say like required in text or with an asterisk, you let the donor or the user know that this information is required and you need to fill it out. So it reduces the chance of them getting frustrated. So hopefully you can enable this ability to catch the form error while they're in flow, or at the very least, can you show with text or design that this is a piece of information that is required? All right, now we start getting into more of the biggies here. Confusion friction is the next one. So confusion frictions when there's like unexpected items to navigate, competing calls to action, distracting links and messages that make you do what this very cute little puppy's doing and go, what's that? That's kind of surprising. Now, some of these things are innocuous. Could be like navigation, for example, right? Once you're on the donation page, me as a user have expressed my intent to complete this donation. So I don't really need your handy navigation to get around your website anymore. So why don't we just remove it? This organization, it was a small sample size, but they saw almost a 200% increase in donations by removing these kind of seemingly innocuous links. But again, you don't want people to navigate to policies or blog or donate and end up back on the same page. So just get rid of these distracting links in the header and the footer in particular. Next time you buy something from, Amazon or Nike or whatever your kind of big corporate purchasing behavior is, once you get into the kind of checkout flow, just look at how few things you can actually do. They're removing distraction or confusion friction. What we found is 60% of nonprofits in this study said that they have menu or navigational links or distractions. Is this the most important thing in your online giving experience? No, it is not. But it's also a completely unnecessary thing to have. So this is where, again, hopefully you have a donation tool or you have the ability to turn off some navigation, or you can do something more advanced again with Google Optimize or within WordPress and use CSS and hide some things. There's really no reason to offer people navigation away. Something that, again, churches did at a much worse rate than the study average. Even worse than kind of the innocuous distractions is specific calls to action to do something else other than donate, which about 30% of organizations in this study did. Now, food banks, according to this study, did a very good job of not doing that. And here's what that can look like. Is you go to click donate, you end up on this donation page. And first you see these kind of, distracting links up top that can take you away. And one, they ask you to kind of watch this video to learn more about the ministry. Not the end of the world, but once you click give, and now you're into step 2, by the way, look at this, stay in touch, sign up for the newsletter, support our work, 4 different ways that you can give, download our app. And because this page is so short and narrow, that's pretty prominent. And it actually is more prominent than the one-time donation field, which is an open field with the comment box. So just from the design, what you're being led to do is basically not donate, sign up for email, do some other action, or download the app. That's not what you want to do. Again, you want to have this very streamlined, focused experience without calls to action and distractions. So this is a Fundraise Up example, which works kind of like a widget light box. You can see there's a little X in the corner, and while these navigation elements are there, you can't actually click them. You're in this giving flow. And then they put in very kind of small passive links, these kind of tooltips with 3 kind of common questions, but you can answer those questions without completely leaving the online giving experience. So once you start to donate, you are now in this experience. Or if you're on a one-page type of format, it could look like this from the Audubon Society. You can see there's nothing for you to do. There's no links up top. Here's the form. Go complete your donation. So on the confusion side, remove distracting links and remove these other calls to actions that may distract the donor. Now, we get into decision friction. And now all these friction factors kind of work together, but confusion and decision are very much linked. And so decision friction is this idea like when there's too many decisions to be made, or there's too many options within one decision, especially without context or clarity, you just get overwhelmed. So this is a Schitt's Creek gif when they sit down at the local cafe and the menu's massive. Think about the Cheesecake Factory, famous menu. There's so many options, it's overwhelming. How do you know where to begin? And we actually do this a lot to our donors. And again, there could be like really small things from just like cover the fees, dedicate this in honor, leave a comment. 3 pretty small things, not that big of a deal. In this experiment, they removed all 3 of those things and actually saw a 100% increase in donation by just limiting the number of decisions someone had to make. It's also tied to field number friction, right? There's a comment box that goes away, so it looks shorter. The dedicate in memory, this is using some layout, so it looks shorter, right? these things all kind of work together. But when you look at why do people make the decisions that they do, there's fundamentally these kind of 5, 6 questions that they are asking. Where do I give? Why should I give? What do I want to support? How often do I want to give? How much do I want to give? And how do I want to pay? So first, where do I give? This is basically finding out how to get to the main donation page. And it sounds like a simple thing, but you'd be surprised what we see. Sometimes organizations don't make it very clear or obvious in their navigation where you go to give. So in this experiment, they did one treatment that said support DTS in purple, and the treatment 2, they had donate in purple. So you can see by kind of calling it out and making the donate button stand out in the navigation here, they actually saw 160% and 190% increase in donations. This is a traffic-based strategy. If someone's interested in giving, how do you let them know where to give? Using design in your navigation, often in that top right with a button that's a different color than the navigation, is the best way to get clicks that we've seen to your donation page. In the study, we looked, does it take more than 5 seconds where to give? And 85% of organizations said no, but 15% of organizations then, it takes you more than 5 seconds to figure out where the heck you just want to give. So if you're that highly motivated user trying to figure out where do you go, it's not as easy as we might like. In particular, these association and membership groups seem to be kind of burying their kind of donate button or ways to give on their page. Same thing with higher ed. Again, there's a lot of competing priorities for higher ed, students and scholarships and foundation and giving. So it does make it a little bit more confusing. That's just finding out where to give. It should be a relatively simple thing. And then why? We don't have nearly as much time today to get into why do people give. But if you remember back to this giving equation that we talked about, the main thing on the value side is this value proposition, or how do you answer this question? Why should I give to you as opposed to another organization, or not at all? And one of the ways that you can do that is just by using copy or text on your donation page. So that's one of the questions that we had. We didn't ascribe positive or negative points because it's not technically a friction factor, but we know that this is something that drives donations. We found that about 3/4 of organizations have more than one sentence on their donation page, but that means 1/4 are what we call naked donation pages. No message on there, no copy. They are assuming you know exactly how much you want to give, you know exactly why you should give. You've made up your mind completely to give. But we know even as little as 2 sentences on a donation page to just reconfirm why a donation is needed today can have a pretty big increase, 28% increase in donations in this case. More often than not, though, a lot of people need a little bit more persuasion and they need a little bit more copy. So roughly half, 55% of organizations did not have more than 4 sentences of copy or text on their donation page. Churches were kind of the worst at this. Hospital and health were kind of the best at this, according to this study. And we know that by using a little bit more copy, you can better articulate often why a donation is needed as opposed to giving to someone else or not giving at all. This is one of the most used experiments in our library, but adding kind of 5 short paragraphs to answer that question, explain why it's needed, they actually saw 150% increase in donations. So I'm not just saying, oh, just go write reams and reams of copy and text, on your donation page, but people need a reason to give, and you often need to do that in copy, at least in some small way. So let's leave that for now. We can recircle to how do you communicate the why, but then it's like, what do I want to support? And this could be gift designation. This could be different parts of the organization. This case, this is a child sponsorship organization. That's one of the main ways that they drive revenue. It's a recurring revenue model where you can choose a child to sponsor with a monthly gifts. And they hypothesized that this original treatment here with kind of rows and rows of 3 kids that are kind of equally weighted isn't helping the donor make the decision. So instead, on the treatment here, they prioritized 1 child, and you could still get the rows and rows of kids beneath that, but they prioritized 1 child to basically say yes or no. And by making it an easier decision, kind of a yes or no decision up front, they actually increased conversions 48%. Now, if you know child sponsorship or recurring giving, that's a very significant increase for this organization by helping improve the likelihood of decision by actually reducing choices or prioritizing 1 choice. So one way that most organizations, or a lot of organizations, run into this decision friction and having too many options is gift designation. So we asked, do you have more than 4 different gift designations? And 76% of organizations said no. Unsurprisingly, kind of hospital, higher ed, these larger organizations that often have sister or partner foundations often had more gift designations. And then we also asked, is a gift designation required? And it's the same thing, 76% said no. And look at higher ed, the majority of higher eds require you, there is no kind of give where most needed. They require you to go out of your way to choose a gift designation, often again without a lot of context and clarity. So an example that we saw of this comes from the Mayo Clinic. And you can see here in their dropdown, they have so many different options and ways for you to designate your gifts. Or this is actually even worse. This organization, you can contribute to an area, a staff, or reset form, but there's no context. They assume that you know who the staff member is, the ministry, the area. There's no defaults. So what we'll often suggest is, can you pick at least like 1 or 2 or maybe 4 areas that I can choose from, or the most common ways to give? I'm just looking at a blank form and I actually don't know where to start here, right? So it's complicated because you can support individuals or programs or projects for this organization, but they're not making it easier on you at all. It's an empty field with unlimited options, essentially. At least in the Mayo Clinic example here, they've defaulted you to greatest needs at the Mayo Clinic. So if you don't want to choose, you don't know what you're looking for, you can just keep going by this, using this pre-selection. Now, in probably a more ideal world, if you don't have a lot of different funds and projects, simpler is almost always better. So in this case, one time or monthly, and you're giving to Feed America. In this case, one time or monthly, and you're giving to, In Touch. If you have these like unique designations, you can maybe capture them through personal emails after the donation, ideally through customized campaigns. Users go through a main donation page and sort through a myriad of options just to complete a one-time or recurring gift to the organization in general. So those are some ways that we can reduce that to figure out what do they want to support. And then how often do they want to give? So we asked, is recurring gifts an option in your main donation page? And 13% of the time, it wasn't even an option. So we don't have enough time to go down the recurring rabbit hole, but recurring donors are worth at least 5 times more than one-time donors. Their donor retention rate's 2 times higher. I feel like a broken record because we keep talking about how valuable recurring donors are. And yet, especially in the US, we don't have nearly as much focus on these incredibly valuable donors. We're getting there, we're making some progress, but we're still pretty far behind. What's surprising is arts and culture. Generally speaking, the smaller an organization you are, the more emphasis you should put on recurring giving, because those donors are even more valuable to you, 10 or 11 times according to the DonorCentrics Sustainer Summit data. Where you're a smaller org, these donors actually have more value because they take less time, energy, and cost basically to retain, and their lifetime value goes up. So that was kind of surprising. Now, there's different ways you can do this. One, beyond just accepting it like this, checkbox, make this a monthly recurring gift. We've seen through different testing that this tabbed approach, where you have single gift and monthly gift on a tab, you can see it there, and then defaulting to single gift, or tabbed layout, single gift, monthly gift, in this case, defaulting to monthly gifts. In each case, the tab layout increased conversion rate. And there's a few different things going on here, but the tabbed layout is more passive. So we're just kind of suggesting monthly or suggesting one time. And it also lets you choose how much you want to give before you get into how much. If I know I want to give every month, then maybe I only want to give $20. If I'm going to give once, maybe I'll give $100, right? There's a difference between frequency and amount. Those things are related. So by letting people choose the amount first, it makes the second decision possibly easier. And in this case, by kind of landing them on an open monthly gift tab, they saw a 366% increase in recurring donor conversion and no discernible difference in one-time donor conversion. So if we go back to a few of these examples and see how they're kind of suggesting monthly giving, you can see that this one here, you've got this decision friction again, one time and recurring, both equally weighted, very little reason why I should choose one or the other. And then, oh, by the way, look at all these other ways to give. Whereas this organization takes this approach. Once you get into, it had a tabbed approach one time monthly, but once you're in the one-time flow, they actually have an upgrade nudge that says, hey, you can become a monthly supporter, keep your one-time gift, donate $5 a month, donate $10 a month. With one click, you convert it to a monthly gift. Something that we've seen a similar approach work, 64% increase in recurring gifts, no discernible difference for one-time donations by using a monthly gift kind of yes or no question later on in a one-time sequence. Or here, so Audubon is kind of trying to suggest a monthly gift. They're using this nudge technique. So they have this arrow, and your monthly support prepares us for every challenge and lets us plan for the future. So trying to nudge you towards making this high value recurring gifts. But that's how we choose how often. And so a lot of organizations, especially arts, maybe have some room to grow in terms of suggesting and focusing on recurring. Then they have to choose how much. One decision friction is, well, how much should I give? It's hard to know sometimes, especially for new donors and new visitors. Suggested gift arrays are typically things that work well. In this case, the organization was wondering, can we make it even easier for someone to choose the amount that we kind of want them to choose? In this case, it was $50. This was actually higher than their average online gift, so they had a pretty low average online gift, and they just put that little treatment box that said most popular with a star as this kind of social proof type nudge to say, maybe we should give this amount. And just that one change, they saw an 8% increase in conversion, 15% increase in average gifts, more donations, more on average means quite a bit more revenue, 24%. So again, one of these ways that we can look at how many options are there in a gift array. There's a ton of research around gift arrays. They're very specific, but what we have seen is once you get above 6, basically now that can be a little overwhelming. For a lot of our clients, the default's 3 and we pre-select the middle one. So 84% of organizations had less than 6, which is good. Higher ed, again, is one of the kind of quote unquote worst in terms of they had more than 6 options. And in that Salesforce study that we looked at globally, 75% of organizations globally had 3 or 4 suggested gift options. So, if you're wondering how many options is too much, 3 or 4 seems pretty safe. Above 6, maybe something not worth doing. And we've seen an open field for returning visitors. If you have a high average gift, actually just leaving it open and having no suggested gift can sometimes outperform the other suggestions. And then lastly, how do I want to pay? We'll get into some kind of mobile wallet stuff here in a second because I think it's really interesting. But one of the questions we asked was, do you have PayPal? And we partnered with Fundraise Up on this study, and they had some great data looking at a bunch of different transactions where PayPal was present and wasn't present. So on the left, you'll see an example where PayPal was not present, right? It was just pay with your credit card, versus the right where it was present. You could give via PayPal. They also had the way to pay with bank, something only about a third of organizations in the US do, even though we've seen no difference in conversion rate, and retention rate goes up for recurring donors with pay by bank. So that's definitely something you should do in your recurring program. Anyways, PayPal. By allowing PayPal, what Fundraise Up research found, and you can find the link to the research on their blog, is 20% of users actually chose to use PayPal, and having the option to use PayPal increased conversion over 6.5%. Now, one caveat, when we're talking about PayPal, I encourage you to go out to National Audubon or a Fundraise Up client and see how they use PayPal, where it's a payment method, where it just kind of pops up, you log into your PayPal account, and it brings you back to the same giving experience. What we've seen a negative impact in conversion is when you kind of have give via PayPal and you go out into PayPal land. They leave your website, they go into PayPal, and now they are completely in PayPal. That is a different experience. That one we've definitely seen negative impact. The kind of integrated, you're just choosing to pay via PayPal, their research and data suggests 20% of users did it, and it helped actually increase conversion. But almost 60% of organizations did not have PayPal as an option. And again, this is often something that you toggle on and off within your tool. Maybe you don't actually have this at your disposal. Maybe you've had it turned off because you've been worried about it. So maybe it's something that you can try turning on. And again, animal welfare and environment actually were two that said they did not have PayPal, which is kind of interesting. These two verticals are often some of the more kind of progressive and leading the way when it comes to digital. So maybe they've seen something in their data that says PayPal isn't good. But Fundraise Up hasn't seen that. We're testing it again, I know, on our side to see more. So PayPal is basically a version of mobile wallet, but when we talk about mobile wallet, we're really talking about Google Pay, Apple Pay, and Amazon Pay in particular. And only 15% of organizations in this study had mobile wallet payments. So here's what mobile wallet payments look like. So on the left, you've got Google Pay, and on the right, you've got Apple Pay. I'll kind of play these each as you go. You choose your amounts. You click Google Pay in this case, brings you into Google Land. I had my information already stored, so I just click continue, and away we go. I'm on to the next step where I can put in my email address, and then there's another couple steps, employer match, that kind of thing. Apple Pay functions very similar. You got to be on a Safari or on an iOS device to activate it. Often, same thing, you just choose the Apple Pay. I already have it stored, obviously, because I buy things within the Apple Store. Double click to pay, and the information passes through. I go right back to the form, processes the gifts, and on we go. So when we look at mobile, and we'll talk about mobile in a bit, this is a really, really important development that's gaining more and more traction to help increase the likelihood of giving. So again, Fundraise Up actually did a study, and this isn't public data. This is kind of just exclusively shared with you and us today, where they looked at the impact of mobile wallets on different types of users. And one, on the Google Pay side, they found that 21% of Android users, people using Chrome, 21% of them chose Google Pay. And when they ran it through the kind of machine learning algorithm, that's one of the things we love about Fundraise Up, is it's always using data to help predict behavior and figure out what's most optimal. They found that by including Google Pay on Google-enabled devices, it should increase conversion about 2.2%. They saw something similar with Apple, where 21% of iOS users chose to use Apple Pay, and they projected about a 1.2% increase conversion on iOS devices with Apple Pay. So definitely something worth exploring and kind of toggling on that switch. There seems to be more and more evidence to say this is a very, very beneficial thing. We've also seen some in the for-profit e-commerce space. We're talking about 3x conversion rates on mobile devices by enabling mobile payments like Google Pay and Apple Pay and things like that. So again, 15% of organizations had it in our study, 85% didn't. And Christian ministries, not known often for kind of leading the charge of technology, in our study ranked highest in terms of opting in. Bigger sections, because decision friction is really, really important. But can you make it easy for people to find? Can you limit the number of decisions people need to make? And within the decision, limit the number of options. Can you reduce the number of available options? And can you use defaults and pre-selections and suggestions and social nudges to help guide the donor? And can you enable these mobile payments? And oh, by the way, you have to make sure there's a reason to give on your page and throughout the process. All right, so that's decision friction. Now we're on to steps friction. This is basically the more steps you have, it could be clicks, but often full page loads you have required decreases the chances of someone completing a donation. So basically, once you get beyond 2 full page loads, conversion rate starts to go down. There's a few reasons for that. One is it's just kind of annoying. If you look at this 4-step process, I choose to give. Step 2, are you sure? Step 3, here's your information. Step 4, confirm. Versus this 1 page, fill out the amount and process the information on 1 step, 18% increase in donations. So in our study, we found that 27%, excuse me, of organizations had more than 1 full step. Had more than 1 full step, meaning, again, especially higher ed of these bigger, more complicated organizations had more than 1 step. Now, within the steps, there's some steps are more detrimental than others. So for example, this kind of are you sure you want to give page, kind of a confirmation page before you actually check out, 30% of organizations still had this type of page. And this is one thing that we'd say, just get rid of it. This organization had this kind of are you sure you want to give page, removed it, and saw 176% increase in donations. This is often comes from like checkout cart type tools, and it's kind of a legacy holdover from like online giving 1.0. But for the most part, there's really no business to have this are you sure you want to give page around. This is a good thing. Only 4% of organizations made you create an account in order to give. That's a good thing because that's huge friction. So in this case, we actually showed an example earlier that had an account optional. So it's not required, which is nice. What we'd suggest is even if it's optional, have it after the fact. Let me go on, it's called lazy registration. Let me go on and complete my donation. You have my information. Now on the confirmation page, hey, would you like an account to manage your giving or more easily connect or whatever the value proposition around creating an account? But delay that, have it after the fact. If you make it part of the actual giving process itself, you may lose people or deter people. This is also good. More and more organizations are not using a checkout cart. Checkout carts are typically very poor for user experience, very poor for conversion. Only 8% of organizations were using one more often than not in the arts and culture. Maybe they're actually selling some things. This is where we run into it most. People who both sell things and want to get donations or have maybe a sponsorship model, they'll often have to use a checkout. But ideally, you're not using a checkout cart at all. And then through the steps, are you actually opening a new window and tab? So instead of staying in the same tab, are you actually opening up a new window? I know Fundraise Up has done some research and found that sometimes views from step to step goes down as much as 8%, which means you're losing 8% of people from step to step just by opening a new tab, which means there's fewer people getting to the next step of the journey or the funnel. Disaster and international, again, one of the higher performing verticals in the study, did a good job of not doing this. And this is where things start to compound. If you're not only opening up a new window or a new tab, but you're also using a third-party domain. So it's no longer on yourorg.org/donate or donate.yourorg. You're actually going to like, donationtool.com/yourorg or something like that. Trust starts to erode. You're dealing with different load times because you're going to a totally different site. And 72% of organizations here kept people on their own URL, but that's 28% are going to a third-party URL. So if we show like what that looks like, you've got this on the, not this on the left, but this more on the right. So this is a bit of a checkout cart. So they add it to cart, then they have to actually go through and complete more information. Sure you want to add this to your carts? Yes, I'm sure I want to add this to my cart. Then they actually get to the checkout where they have to put in their information. So there's multiple steps in this case, and oftentimes they'll put you to a new URL or third-party URL or domain, compared to this on the right, which again is a widget style giving, but it's all on one page, all in one flow. You're not jumping in and out, and it's a seamless switch. So you're reducing the likelihood of someone leaving, especially when we talk about waiting friction or load time. Every time you open a new page or a new window, you're dealing with load time. And especially if you have a poor load time, you could lose donors solely based off windows and load times. So again, this is kind of involves your tool, but hopefully you're reducing the number of steps and can remove those unnecessary ones. And as much as you can, keep the donation process on one page or one domain. All right, device friction. So this is really what we're talking about is like needing to pinch and zoom to navigate in order to complete a donation. We're not really going into mobile responsive and mobile optimization. We just had this simple framework as like, is it functional on a mobile? And here's why mobile is important. Half of all website visits are on a mobile to nonprofits. 25% of all online giving now is happening on a mobile device. It's growing about 20% every single year. So more and more people are visiting websites and making donations, which is great. Again, this is why those mobile wallets are a needed innovation and something that we need. But keep in mind, the conversion rate on mobile devices is about a third of that on desktop. And the average gift on a desktop is still 90% larger. So one of the ways that we actually often optimize for fundraising is figuring out how do we get more people to target more people using a desktop when they're more likely to be using a desktop, because they're more likely to convert and they're more likely to be more generous. Again, it's shifting slightly, but keep that in mind. So mobile is growing, but desktop is still outperforms in conversion and average gift. So that's just like basic mobile. Is it mobile friendly? Can you navigate without pinching and zooming? And one thing to keep in mind with friction, everything is worse on a mobile device. Field number, field layout, form error, confusion, decision, steps, device waiting, everything is compounded on a mobile device where you're moving faster and you're on a smaller screen. So this, the number of steps, by reducing it, they actually saw a 64% increase on mobile devices. This little social nudge to say maybe you should give this much actually helped increase 44% on mobile devices. So reducing friction is even more important if you want to have success on a mobile device. So again, was your page mobile friendly? 19% of organizations in this study did not have a mobile friendly donation page. And again, that is the bare bones starting point right now. So that is often related to tool and technology, but if you do not have even a mobile friendly donation page, you seriously need to think about moving donation tools or providers, or calling your tool and provider and saying, what the heck is going on? Show some of these stats about how it's rising and growing, and see if you can get some help. Because if it's not mobile friendly, there's often not a lot that you can do outside of changing tools. This is where we saw animal welfare, surprisingly not very good, and food banks also somewhat surprisingly not very good. Again, self-reported data in this study. And again, I think you know this, but a not very good example and then a better example of just what it means to navigate a donation page. Scroll time and how visual the buttons you have to click instead of little radio buttons, integrations with mobile wallets, all those types of things. So reduce and eliminate as much friction as you can, because on a mobile device it compounds, and at minimum ensure the donation page is mobile friendly. All right, last one is waiting friction. I talked about this already, but waiting friction is just anything that causes donor to wait. Load times, spinning wheel, those types of things. In the M&R benchmark study, they found that the average main donation page takes about 2.6 seconds to load on desktop, 2.77 seconds to load on mobile. So again, when you're jumping from page to page, it's at least 2.5 seconds every single time So you're just adding the time with all these different steps. So we asked, does it take more than 5 seconds? We linked out to a tool people could use to kind of measure their own speed. 13% of organizations took more than 5 seconds for a page to load. So if you're one of those organizations, you may be just losing donors just because they're not willing to wait for more than 5 seconds. And again, here's some of that research that Fundraise Up provided, where they saw this drop off by opening up a new tab or new page as opposed to keeping people on the page, where just views went down 8%, which would then have implications for conversion rate. So go, test your own page, hopefully have people report it to you if there's a lag, reduce load time. It's often a tool, but some things like images and the load, how big those images are on your page. And then just reducing steps. Again, if you've got a bad load time, it's more important to have a simple key step. All right, a few other key findings here, and then we'll get into some questions. One, trust matters. If you look back to this giving equation, on the cost side, we have this anxiety factor. And a couple of ways that you can answer someone's anxiety, they're really trying to answer these two questions. Why should I trust you with my money? Why should I trust you with my information? So on the money side, one of the things that we've seen is by being a trustworthy organization, maybe you can visually showcase that with like a seal. So this organization has 2 seals. In this test, they added the Charity Navigator seal, and they actually saw a 64% increase in donations, 92% statistical significance in this case. But it's in view right under the donation button to try to reemphasize, don't worry, we are a trustworthy organization. We will do with your money what we said we will do. You can trust us. We're validated or verified by someone else. 30% of organizations in our friction study did not have those third-party endorsements at all. So it's not the biggest thing in the giving equation. Why you should give is more important than, having a trust mark, but it's also something that has very little downside to showcasing how trustworthy you are with some kind of seal. Disaster and International, again, somewhat surprisingly, was the least likely to actually do this. And why should I trust you with my information, in particular the credit card information? What we've seen in our experiment library is just by kind of calling out the credit card area with a different color, in this case, a lockbox, we can actually increase conversion almost 10%, even though that page is no more secure than anything else, right? It's just as secure as the other thing. It just visually reinforces that this is secure, helped increase donations almost 10%. This is something that very few organizations in our study are doing. Just about 50%, 52% do not have some kind of security message or reinforcement in the credit card area itself. So opportunity for you, opportunity for providers to showcase trust and support and security in this area right here. Surprisingly, Christian ministries and churches are least likely to do this. So maybe they are riding on their high trust, moral factor, religious factor, but they're not visually reinforcing it when you actually go to give your gift. So a few different ways this can look like. Credit card security reinforcement there on the left. You can see payment information is shaded with a lockbox, or credit card with this SSL encryption. We abide by the strictest industry standards. Never store any of your credit card information being displayed. Or third-party trust marks. You can see Charity Navigator and Transparent Seal below the Give button. Charity Navigator, BBB, Norton Secured below the Submit button. Again, these trust marks, if you're using them, they need to be in view. If they're buried in your page somewhere and the donor can't see it, it doesn't really have the same impact. And then reinforce the security in the credit card area as well. Last key finding, you can't optimize what you can't measure. And so we had some questions in there around, what is your conversion rate? Only 10% of people who filled out this form knew what their main donation page conversion rate was. Now, maybe more could go and find it, but they just didn't know it off the top of their head. But still, only 10% of organizations knew what their conversion rate was. 52% of organizations haven't made any change to their donation page in the last 3 months, just kind of, let it roll. And 92% of organizations have not conducted an A/B test on their donation page in the last 6 months. So if we don't know what works, we're not making changes, and we're not testing, there's no wonder that conversion rates are kind of staying low. So this is a real area of improvement for everyone. Is how can you kind of make donations to yourself regularly? Is stuff just working? Try to look with a fresh perspective. Can you install e-commerce or other ways so that you can see conversion rates more easily within Google Analytics? You don't have to rely on your CRM. And for more proven tactics, implement them. Some of these things that we're talking about today, just don't test them, just do them. But for things that are like riskier or less proven, or if you have more volume and you can test, then by all means, go ahead and test it for yourself. So there was one more idea that we can circle back to. I just want to make sure that we have enough time for questions. So I'm going to skip ahead on the one idea. We can always come back and revisit. So a few kind of go deeper resources. One, this tool is still active. So hopefully you've already used this tool and you've benchmarked yourself. But if not, please go to donationpagefriction.com, run through those 25 questions, 36 questions. You can see how you performed. Nathan and the team whipped up a donation page friction checklist. So we'll actually send this to you for coming today. So check your inbox later. We'll just send this to you, but it's a little thing you can print out or have open and use it as a rough guide. And if you're wanting to kind of get your hands even dirtier and go deeper, we do have a donation page course, nextchapter.com/donation course. And we'll kind of walk through even more research and creating value proposition and how to position recurring, the 3 different types of donation pages. They're not all the same, how to use copy, all those types of things. This is a course that's available for free right now, thanks to our friends at Raise Donors as well. So that's great. All right, so now we are going to move into questions. And as my son Hendrix, whose birthday it is today, says, in a little bit. That's his favorite thing. But I want to hand it over to Nick. So as you're getting your questions ready, please get them in. Nick, thank you so much again for partnering with us on this research, on this tool. I'd love for you to share a little bit more about Fundraise Up and some of the cool things that y'all are up to.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Brady. And thanks for the opportunity to partner on this important research project. From the questions that I've seen so far, can see that a lot of people want to learn more about how they can optimize these experiences. And that's precisely what we do here at Fundraise Up. We are a technology company serving the nonprofit sector. And what we've done is look at e-commerce and see how online retail has made it incredibly easy for us as consumers to make purchases and translate that technology into a way for people to donate on your website with the same ease and the same access to mobile wallets, optimized checkout experiences, etc. And that's what we built. That's what we're about. And we have the privilege of serving some of the world's most impactful nonprofits from our office here in Brooklyn, New York.
Awesome. And is there something coming up that you want to invite people to?
Absolutely, there sure is. So as you can see on the screen right now, I'd like to personally invite you to our next webinar here at Fundraise Up, and we are taking a look at the impact of asking donors to cover transaction costs. This is a question that has existed, I think, since the beginning of time when it comes to online fundraising, and we've studied almost 500,000 donors and their behavior to understand what it really means to put that checkbox in front of a donor and what they do with it. So if you are interested in learning what's going on here, number one, make sure you take that friction assessment test because we'll make sure to send you an invitation. And number two, if you're on this webinar and you've opted in to receive communication, we'll make sure you get an invitation as well.
Awesome, thanks. Yeah, and Fundraise Up has been a great resource for me too when I have these questions. They're like the first person I go to be like, hey, have you guys tested this? Do you know? Because some people will say, oh, X% of people cover the cost. That's great. But Fundraise Up goes beyond that to think about the implications of conversion rate and how to position transaction costs and things like that. So I encourage you to check out that webinar. All right, well, that's all the content we have. We did a pretty good job. We're a little under time. So
it's not even 2.
Let's get into the questions.
Yeah, let's do it. We've got a bunch of them. At the moment, we have 27, maybe 26. One just got answered. That's great. And there's some similar questions and topics. So let's just jump in. Going back to the very beginning, I think in that first category of friction, maybe you were talking about, Jamil's wondering, how do you recommend allowing things like in honor of gifts on a donation form if that is going to increase friction? Is there a way to implement that without overburdening someone?
Yeah, so even in one of those examples where they had a checkbox and then they removed it completely, that's one suggestion, honestly, is that everyone needs to ask ourselves, do donors really want to make gifts in honor, or are we the nonprofit driving people to consider making those gifts in honor?
Yeah.
So one suggestion is you have a different giving experience that's specific to giving in honor. So, you say, looking to give in honor, if you'd like to make a gift in honor, you'd run that campaign, you point to a different page, but you don't make everyone have that. But one, it's often like a little checkbox, and only if they check it or only if they click it does that expand. Who does it go to? When will they receive your card? I would suggest if you have that, share a little bit, because a lot of people don't know what does it mean to make a gift in honor. Like, right. Do they get flowers? Do they actually get the money? Yeah. So context and clarity is really key. I'm probably more in the camp that unless you're maybe like a health organization or something, not a lot of donors are like looking for it. So maybe you just have a different on your ways to give page or something and remove it from the main flow. But if you have to have it in there, context and clarity, hide it, and then it expands if people want to do it, is the general suggestion.
Cool. Awesome. Thank you. Here's a question from Anonymous, wondering about, you talked about the phone number, talk about how you shouldn't require it. This person says, how should phone number not be required? I work in higher ed. We need a phone number as a form of stewardship. We text our donors. We have phone-a-thons. Is there a way to ask for a phone number in a way that isn't intrusive? Or is there a point where you really would require a phone number?
Yeah, so again, this is where like context is key.
Yeah.
If you have those types of plans, you're going to call donors for stewardship, you're going to text them, you're going to do an integrated multi-channel giving day campaign with text updates and things, then maybe it does make sense for you to require and say, look, we're going to get fewer donors, but the value of donors with phone numbers is going to exceed it. What we've seen though is making it optional has no difference on conversion rate, and those people that want you to have the phone number will give it to you.
Yeah.
So we run this test all the time, even on our own stuff, with even fundraising partners like Fundraise Up and Salesforce and whoever, is saying, can we get more total phone numbers by not requiring, right? If you get a bunch of people who say, I don't want to give because I don't want to give up my phone number, if you get that many more people, maybe by even having less people on a percentage base to give it, you'll still end up with more phone numbers and more donors. So that's one of the reasons why that would be a great thing to test. And what we've done is when we test the communication side, how likely are people to send voicemails and use the phone? Very, very few. Less than 10% of organizations in a lot of our studies call us or text us. So if you're requiring a phone number and saying we're going to use phone, you better be dang sure that you're going to use the phone. Otherwise, you're probably just losing donors for no point and purpose. Yeah. But again, public radio is a place where we've done huge, phone, telephone. It's way more important for those organizations. So maybe it makes sense. It's about the trade-offs, and just know you will lose donors by requiring phone. Some other ways to do it is post donation, right? Thank you so much for your gift. Hey, while you're here, we'd love to keep you up to date with text messages and phone calls to say thanks. Would you mind providing your phone number? So you don't make them engage with that while they're giving, but you can collect it afterwards. That's another option.
Yeah, that's great.
Something like
Maybe
that.
you do both. You've got optional up front, and then you've got this second prompt.
And I don't know if Nick, do you have any more input on these things? We got to remember that you've got a lot of experience and data on these things too.
Absolutely. And in fact, for those of you that have questions beyond what we talk about today, please do feel free to email me. My email address is nick@fundraiseup.com. But what I'll say about phone numbers is that I am guilty. As somebody who was an annual fund director in higher ed, I was in that very position of believing, okay, I need to have X, Y, and Z collected from my donor. But the revelation that I eventually had was that I should segment out my audience and target specific people and ask for their phone numbers. So perhaps it's an audience that I already know is on a mobile device, maybe it's a younger generation, for example, and ask them for it. But to your point, Brady, absolutely. When just by making that field optional, you may see an uptick in people who actually submit that phone number, and definitely not a loss in conversion.
Right.
That's great. Thanks, Nick. All right, we've got a question. Actually, we have several questions that are kind of related to the navigation and to other ways to give. Obviously, we don't want to distract people with other navigation items, especially if you've come to a donation page. You don't want to like right off the top ask them like, hey, why don't you mail in a gift, or like do anything else. But what's the best place for those types of additional links? So this first question here from Bryn is basically saying, if we get rid of the nav bar, should we keep our logo at the top? Which the answer is certainly yes. But then what do you do with other things like ways to give that are important? Where do you position those? Do they go in the footer? Do they go on the side? Do you get rid of them? Thoughts from either of you on that?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, the first thing is there's a donate now page and a ways to give page, and never the two shall meet. They're different pages that serve different purposes, right? Ways to give is if someone maybe visits the donate now page and is like, oh, I'm actually looking to give stock. Maybe they can go find it, that type of thing. Whereas donate now is like, how do we process your information via bank or credit card or something that's instant? So like I showed you the Fundraise Up solution where they had kind of three kind of links that were like there, but kind of passive and not priority that you could kind of click and answer some of those questions. Sometimes people will have, the three most common, but like below the fold and more passive. So if people are looking for them, they can scroll and find them. And often sometimes it's just like, looking for another way to give, kind of click here, but you don't make that the like priority thing. So again, you want to focus as much as you can on you're here to complete a donation. How do we make that as easy as possible? Have the ways to give page list all the million ways that you could possibly do. When I had my own agency, we would build at the very, very kind of bottom up to 5 expandable questions. And one of them was like, what other ways can I give? So again, don't make it an issue for someone before they make it an issue for themselves. So that's why you can kind of have it lower. I don't know, Nick, is that what you guys found in kind of your research by you have the more passive links of saying, like, if people are digging, you can give it to them, but it's stay in the giving flow?
Absolutely. And my recommendation to our viewers is to consider that person that's going to that donate button on your website as a digital donor. They have the intention of giving through a digital method, so you don't need to necessarily place front and center these alternatives to giving.
Yeah, that's a good call. All right, we got several more. Let's keep rolling here. In the field number friction category, does it help to pre-fill your fields? So like if you have the information about a donor already, can you pre-fill some of that to smooth things over? I see you searching for slides.
Well, let's go back to this one other idea that I had, because this is it. So we did this combo presentation with Marcus Blees in Australia, and we were talking about how to like personalize the online giving experience. And he just showed these examples of what they're doing is, using people's names and subject lines and people's names, Dear James, and, your gift of $50 and James, it's simple personalization stuff in an email, no big deal. But they're passing it through to the donation page. So when you land on the donation page, it says, James, will you bring a family back? James is in the copy. $50 is pre-selected. Even on the thank you page, they carry through your name. So it says, James, thank you so much for your kind gift. Obviously into then the thank you email. They saw a 3x conversion on donations while doing this. Now, this isn't a main donation page strategy. I should clarify. This is a campaign donation page when you're pushing from email to donate. We ran this experiment where instead of having the information just sit there, we just passed it through using like UTM variables into a form field and actually saw a 280.5% increase in revenue per visitor, a 60% increase in mobile conversions. Wow. It was an 88% level of confidence. But all indicators are, if you can pre-fill their information, for sure. And this is actually one of the cool things that you can do with Fundraise Up as well, is you can pass through very easily first name, last name, so their experience feels more personal. And you can even preload like first name, last name, email into the donation form field. So all of our research seems to indicate yes. Other people's research seems to indicate yes. Nick, I'm sure you can expand on this, but the short answer seems to be yes.
Agreed. Yes. And the reason behind it comes down to how much brain power you're exerting. And to Brady's point earlier in the presentation about how things become more difficult when you're on a mobile device, the same is true of having to enter this information. I have skinny fingers and I still tap the wrong keys. I still spell my email wrong and enter my credit card information incorrectly. So I'm not saying you can pass through credit card information, but with some of these other data points like name and email address, when you push those through, it requires less brain power to actually physically type it out, and definitely removes the friction of having to backspace and re-enter your information if it's incorrect.
And obviously this puts more pressure on CRM, email program. If you're passing through someone's name, you're gonna have it all throughout the giving experience. And you call me Brandy or something like that, it's probably not great. I've been called worse, but it's probably not great, right? So it does put more pressure on the whole data system.
Awesome, thank you both. Here's a question from Valerio, wondering, as you're showing all the different case studies and A/B tests and experiments, how do you manage low traffic tests? If you don't have a lot of traffic, how do you start to test some of these different friction ideas and actually see valid results, or can you? Yeah,
you can. It's a great question. That's kind of what I alluded to at the end for some of these things. Just do them. Like if you're requiring someone's birthday, just don't, there's no need to go test that, especially if you're low volume. It'll almost be impossible to test. Hopefully you can borrow our research. That's why we make experiments publicly available. Fundraise Up, use some of their stuff, especially if you're small and low traffic. There's a ton of these things that, yes, in theory, you could test them. In reality, you can't and won't. So just go do them. That's why we create these tools and templates. But if there are some things like your message or your value proposition, should we default to recurring or not? Like some of these bigger ones that are a little more risky, if you have smaller traffic, the thing that we would suggest is a radical redesign or a variable cluster. So radical redesign is, we've got a 2-step donation page that looks just like everything else. We'd say, can you make that like a 1-step long form page, something that's very noticeably different. Because the smaller sample size you have to work with, the larger the difference actually has to be to notice that difference in the data. So you have to make radical changes, change colors, change message, you change a bunch of different things, and often it's trying to get back on the right track. So if you have a widget style, can a one page work? If you're one page, try a widget, something like that. Or variable cluster, when you'll say like our hypothesis by maybe sounding more like a human throughout the online giving experience, we can increase donations. So from headline to text to step 1, step 2, step 3 of the donation through the button, you can change all of those factors along that common hypothesis. And because you're changing more things, you have a better chance of actually seeing a different result. But if you just change button color, you'll never see a difference, and it's not really a significant difference if you have small samples. So radical redesign, variable cluster on a common hypothesis are the two things that you should do on a small organization.
Yeah.
I know this is one of the reasons why I've, like an organization I volunteer with, I said, just use Fundraise Up, honestly, because it's built and it's kind of optimizing for you, because they're running these experiments, not just for you, but across. So if they learn something, you get the benefit of doing that. And especially if you're a small nonprofit, you shouldn't be spending a lot of time, running tests and optimizing your forms. As much as we love that, you should probably be spending your time doing something else. So finding a tool like Fundraise Up that's kind of good and learning on your behalf is hugely important.
Nick, anything else you'd add to that?
I'll just echo and say, rely on the research that's already been done. And oftentimes we will put into two different buckets, consumer behavior and donor behavior. But at the end of the day, it's all human behavior. And we have already found so many things, and I'm not just talking about Fundraise Up or Next After, but so many organizations that have tackled these issues already of friction, that we know what works and what doesn't. And what doesn't work, you can pull out even at the small scale without having to run the tests yourself.
That's great. That's great. We were just talking the other day, you were on a panel at another thing with a fundraiser consultant talking about, like, I've been talking about the same thing for years and years and years and years and years, and like we still have the same problems. So like such a great benefit to be able to plug into something like Fundraise Up and learn from what they're learning, and then be able to kind of put that behind you and keep moving forward, knowing it's being optimized in the background. So we've got several more. Let's keep plugging. This is, I think, a really important question, so I'm going to jump to it. What should be the first point of friction that someone tries to tackle? Is there one of these that's like the most critical, or maybe the most common, where someone should really start?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Two things. The biggest reason why someone will give to your organization is the value proposition. That's what we've learned throughout all of our research. So, if someone like desperately loves your organization and believes in your mission, they'll put up with a lot of friction actually and still complete a donation. So on that equation, value costs, the thing that's most important is the value side. How do you communicate the value of a donation, especially clarity? How do they understand that their donation will make a difference? That's the most important thing, but it's often the hardest thing to really figure out. It's the most complicated thing to test. So it's the most important, but often we'll use that equation and we'll actually go back to front when we're trying to optimize a donation page. So we'll start with like anxiety of like, are you trustworthy at all? Like credit card security, trust seals, just like you're trustworthy. Okay, that's one thing. Then we'll go into these friction factors and kind of work our way through. And often you're just trying to eliminate the easiest ones. And some of the easiest ones are like navigation things. We don't need to require that form, and this is where you'll get little increases. Of those friction ones, then a decision friction is probably the hardest one within the 8 different types of friction to actually identify and know. So I would almost kind of go from easiest to hardest on the friction side, is just crank out all the easy ones that you can, because that's where like the low hanging fruit stuff is. And then like decisions, is it one time recurring, suggested amounts, if you still have all these other easy things, maybe get rid of those first, and then you can focus on decision friction, knowing that the most important thing is still, value proposition. I don't know, Nick?
Here's an easy test that our viewers can apply. Position yourself as the donor on a mission to make a donation. And as you go to your nonprofit's website, pay attention to how many steps it takes to complete that mission. And what I've found is that a lot of websites, as great as their causes might be, place too many interstitial views in between your entry point on the website and the completion of the donation. So you might click that donate button, but it doesn't take you to the form. It takes you to a separate page with those other ways to give. And to make an online gift, you might have to scroll down the page, click on that, and then you have another page that says, do you want to give once or do you want to give monthly? You click either of those options, and then finally, you're at the donation form. So if your journey is like that and your mission is difficult to complete, look at that as the first steps you can take in removing pages that get in the way of a donor making their donation.
Well, it kind of leads us into a couple other questions people have had about like steps friction specifically, and wondering the difference between, conversions if we have this type of, I know this is a question we all have asked many times, is like, should I have just a one-page, single-page donation form, or is it okay to use like a multi-step widget tool like Fundraise Up? Is there any significant difference in performance or conversions between those two? Any data that y'all can bring to the table around that?
What I can share without diving too much into the research on our end is that with the way that we've built out the platform, we know that we are in step one negating those page redirects where we know you're losing upwards of 10% of people. And so if we look at the previous example and the friction that's in the way of you completing your mission as a donor, and you have multiple pages, take that 10-second number and multiply it by 2, by 3, you might have up to a minute of friction in there where your conversion rate drops off. And so with our approach, what we've seen is the end result, where a nonprofit will, after a year of using the platform, double their online digital donation revenue and see a 3 times over increase in recurring donor acquisition. So again, anecdotally speaking, that's the contrast we see between a traditional donation form where you might have multiple input fields on the same page and a modal-based solution that is a multi-step checkout.
Yeah, so that's one really key thing is the page load steps. That's why we articulate that, is every time there's a new page load, even if it's on your own domain, you do run the risk of loss, time load, etc. On the widget thing, I don't have any data to necessarily back this up, just like a lot of personal experience. I think what Fundraise Up has built kind of a multi-step. I think if you do it well, it should be better because you get people started. Right. So it's the same concept of how do you just get someone started and then in momentum and keep going. Yeah. And if it's really, really well built, it just feels seamless. Like that information slide, and you're actually gaining momentum. Yeah. And if someone drops off, they've already given you, say, name and email. There's retargeting. Fundraise Up as a tool that just says like, hey, you didn't complete your checkout. Those types of things. Yeah. The thing to keep in mind though is about risk reduction. If you do that wrong, big downside, right? Because now you've got a clunky multi-step thing that's not accelerating momentum. It's actually all over the place. So that's where like up to date, and it would still be our default, is like one page, one form is pretty hard to screw up, is you got one load, but then it's just there. So that's why often we'll teach and suggest that. Although I do think the upside of a multifaceted widget, there is some benefit to that. But that's where, again, you've got a really significant, tool like Fundraise Up that's doing it. I would never say like, go build that yourselves. Yeah. For sure. It's a nightmare.
I agree there. And that's a good takeaway for everyone. Don't hear this and say, okay, the solution to our friction is to build a multi-step form. Start simple by taking your existing form that might have all of the input fields on a single page and look at reducing the quantity of those fields first.
Great. Well, thank you both so much. We still have some other questions, but it's 2:15. I want to be conscious of time. If you have additional questions, feel free to email us or email Nick. We'd be happy to chat with you a little bit more. And plus, we'll have this full research study coming in the next, I don't want to overpromise. Brady, Nick?
Next year. It's in the next year. No, the goal is to get it out.
Brady on that one.
The goal is to get it out in the next month or so.
All right. So coming your way fairly soon, you'll have this full research report to dive into. Again, we'll send you slides, we'll send you recordings. You can dive deeper, go look at some of those examples, take some more time, share it with your staff. I saw some people really interested in sharing it with their IT and development staff to get some of these changes implemented. Brady and Nick, actually, Nick, we'll start with you. Any parting words of encouragement you have for our viewers today?
Yes, absolutely. And I'm going to use one question that I saw in there in particular, and they they were saying, we have a really clunky CRM. It can't do any of this. How do we get started? And again, get started with the small things, but also know that there is software out in the universe, like FundraiseUp, that takes all of that heavy lifting away from you, your engineers, your developers, your back office staff, and just makes it easy for you and your donors. So keep that in mind. And I'll also include that we are not just a company that puts software out into the world. We are genuinely curious about the friction points that exist in donors showing support for your cause. And that's why we engage in research like this and why we have presentations like our June 3 webinar coming up. So if you have specific questions about data and you want to take advantage of millions and millions of data points and transactions that we can review, come chat with us. And I invite you to connect with me on LinkedIn. Just search my name, Nick, NIC Miller, and I'll be more than happy to share some inside scoop on data that we gather. And I'm also going to plug here on your behalf, Brady and Nathan, NEO Summit in September. This is an awesome conference, and if you have not yet been to it, you need to go. And this is a great opportunity for you to go for free. If you come and chat with me and the FundraiseUp team, and you find that FundraiseUp is going to be a good solution for your nonprofit, we do have some complimentary tickets that we would like to give you. So come find us and take advantage of NEO 2021.
Sounds like a sweet deal. Boosting
Very
donation
sweet deal.
conversion, free ticket to the summit. That's solid.
Win-win.
Thanks, Nick. Brady, any parting thoughts?
No, I think Nick kind of sold him. Take one thing. That's the thing we always say after one. Just take one of these things and try to do it. And then I do think Nick's right. Like I did this with an organization I'm volunteering and said, look, we could change this and change this and change this and make it a little bit better, but this tool is so limited. You're so far off track of what a good tool would be.
Yeah.
Even if you put in all this effort, you're still going to be miles behind. And so I know there's change costs and I know things like that, but just think about the revenue and donors that you could be losing. And then the time it will take to catch up on the user experience side when you factor that into using FundraiseUp or another tool. It doesn't have to be FundraiseUp. But often like, oh, well, our tool sucks. It's like, well, that is a choice. It is a choice to use a sucky tool. It is. I understand the limitations and things like that, but it is a choice to continue using a limiting tool. So that's one side. The other side is just do one thing that you can do a little bit better.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you both so much. Again, if you have any questions, feel free to email us. You can email Brady directly, email FundraiseUp directly. We wish you the best. We're rooting for you always. And we'll see you on the next webinar. Take care.
See you, everyone.